It's the Opperman Report. And now, here is investigator Ed Opperman.
Okay, welcome to the Opperman Report. I'm your host, Private Investigator Ed Opperman. You can find me at Opperman Investigations and Digital Forensic Consulting, either through my website, emailrevealer.com, or just email me directly at oppermaninvestigations@gmail.com. I'm very excited about today's topic, not because it's a fun topic, because it's an important topic, and it's about sexual abuse in the military. We have with us Dr. Mick Hunter. It's spelled M-I-C. You can find him at drmichunter-honorbetrayed is his website, and he's written the book Honor Betrayed, Sexual Abuse in America's Military. Dr. Hunter, are you there?
I am. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you so much, because like I said, this is an important topic, and I don't hear anybody else talking about it. Before we get into your book, tell us about yourself. Who is Dr. Mick Hunter?
Well, I started out working in alcohol treatment programs and found a lot of the people there had been sexually abused. And in 1990, I wrote a book about sexual abuse of boys, and I had trouble getting it published. I went to 50 different publishers because they all told me, well, boys don't get sexually abused, and even if it did, it wouldn't hurt them. And then years later, after that book was published, I got a call in the middle of the night one time, and it was a veteran, and he said, when are you going to write a book about sexual abuse in the military? And I said, I don't know. Does that even happen? You know, I haven't heard anything about it. And he said, yes, it does. And I said, well, you know, I like to have first-person stories in my books, and I don't think that I'll be able to get people to give me their stories because I'm not a veteran myself. And he said, oh, no, you'll be surprised. And so I put a notice out that I was going to try to write this book if I could get stories, and I'd get these phone calls, and the first question would be, are you a veteran? I'd say, well, no, I'm not. And they'd say, well, good, then I'll talk to you. And I thought it was going to be the opposite reaction. And basically what they said was, well, we're afraid if you were a veteran, you wouldn't believe us, or that you'd tell us that it's a bad time to talk about it, or it's bad for morale, or something like that. And then when I got the stories and the research and everything collected, I started looking for a publisher, and I went through 50 publishers, and they all told me service members don't get abused, and if they did, it wouldn't hurt them anyway. And it was amazing to me that it was the same argument that I had heard, decades before about boys, and now, we accept the fact that boys do get sexually abused, and it does hurt them. And the same is true of military people. They get abused, and it hurts them.
How common is sexual abuse in the military?
Well, that's really hard to say because the research is that most sexual assaults don't get reported. That's true in the civilian world and in the military as well. And I do evaluations for the Veterans Association on people who are claiming post-traumatic stress disorder as a result of military sexual abuse. And it actually says on the document that I'm filling out, most sexual assaults do not get reported. Therefore, you need to look for signs that it probably happened. They call them markers, like going AWOL or, asking for sexually transmitted disease tests, things like that, to say, well, beyond a reasonable doubt, even though it was never reported to authorities, we can assume that this assault actually happened. And that the research that has been done where they ask veterans, directly, were you ever sexually abused while in the military? Many, particularly men, will not answer the question. They just skip it. So we don't really know. But when I do lectures on it, when people say, well, is sexual abuse in the military a problem? I say, well, if you or a loved one gets sexually abused, then it is a problem.
Now, are these sexual attacks that are occurring in the military, are they happening overseas in combat or in the United States as well, or on bases that are in non-combat zones?
Well, we would think that, rape would happen in the kind of the heat of battle and whatnot, but actually it's quite low then. It's higher in occupational armies because people have to shift from having an enemy mentality to having a allied mentality, and that's hard. But no, it's happening overseas, and it happens on bases in America, and that it is men and women getting sexually assaulted.
Now, when you hear people, they hear, well, you went to prison, and they start making jokes. Oh, did you drop the soap and stuff like that? Because they have, right. They have this idea that rape is so common in prison. Can you compare the rape statistics of male-on-male rape in the U.S. military as compared to prisons?
Well, again, that's a problem, because if you ask wardens, how many sexual assaults do you have in your prison, they will underreport it, because if there's a lot of them, that makes them look bad, and that there's been attempts at trying to get condoms to be distributed freely in prisons to stop the spread of sexually transmitted diseases. And wardens will say, well, no, we don't want to do that because that encourages homosexual behavior, and that the other way they'll minimize sexual assaults is they'll say that it's consensual, that it's not sexual assault, but when you have somebody saying, well, either me and these 8 guys will beat the, crap out of you, or you're going to do this sexual thing, is that really consent?
But on the other hand, there is consensual prostitution in prison. There's no doubt about that. There's quite a bit of consensual prostitution that goes on in the prison systems. Now, also, can you compare this to you hear these horrific statistics of young college girls, 1 out of 5 being sexually assaulted in college? Yeah, we have a problem with sexual assault in America. That it happens way more often than people believe, and people have these. As long as you have these kind of defenses, like, well, only people that ask for it get sexually assaulted, then of course someone that you love and you won't be asking to get sexually assaulted, and so you're safe. And so it's a psychological defense that makes it easier to think you're safe and to blame other people when they get sexually assaulted. Fascinating. And also, what do you make too of people who love to claim, oh, women just make up these allegations against men to tarnish, get revenge and tarnish them, or get fame, accusing Trump or Biden, just to get fame and notoriety. What do you make of those claims?
Well, certainly there's going to be people who make false claims about all kinds of things, but the FBI has determined that the rate of false accusations of rape are less than the false accusations of home robbery.
I guess in that case it's insurance. Yes, I guess it's quite a bit.
Exactly. Right. Yeah, well, I remember I had a girlfriend whose dad's car caught fire and burned down. And, I remember we were sitting at the table and he said, it's really too bad that your mother's fur coat was in there and my camera was in there and my gun was in there. And, and so he made money on that. And, I was naive and young. It never occurred to me that maybe he torched the car.
It's tempting. You're filling out those claim reports, Oh, yeah, my watch was in there, too, But back to a very serious topic. Now, what is it about the culture of the military, though, that makes this more prevalent than the average guy just going to school? And you don't hear about men in college getting raped this often, do you?
No, the military has some things that make it easier to have a rape mentality. One is learning to depersonalize people. It's actually hard to kill people. There's a fantastic book called On Killing, which talks about how difficult it is to get human beings to kill each other. And in real life, in video games and things like that, it seems pretty easy. But the way to do it is to depersonalize them. You call them names. You call them ragheads or gooks or krauts or, slant eyes or something, because it makes it easier to kill them. No sergeant is going to say to his platoon, now when we go searching through this town looking for armed men, remember that they're fathers and brothers and, husbands, they have their God and, they want to be loyal to their country too. You say, no, they're not like us. They're not humans, because that makes it easier to kill them. Okay. Well, then once you learn how to depersonalize people, it's easier to start depersonalizing somebody because, oh, that's a college boy, or women don't belong in the military, or he's gay, and so they deserve this. And that if they're somehow violating the sanctity of the military and they don't deserve to be here, this is a way to punish them for being here or to get them to leave the military. 50% of the men who get sexually assaulted that we know of want to leave the military afterwards.
They want to believe expensive. They want to believe the military.
They want to leave. They want to leave the military. They want to be discharged.
Gotcha.
And to get away from it, because if you get raped at Target or Cub Foods or something, you can quit your job and leave. You can't just say to the military, well, I got sexually assaulted, so I quit. And so oftentimes what happens is people will do things to try to get discharged. There's a story in Honor Betrayed where this guy gets sexually assaulted, and he keeps going AWOL, thinking they will give him a dishonorable discharge, and that he's such a good soldier otherwise that they can, don't worry about it, it's not a big deal. And he has to stay in the unit where he was sexually assaulted.
Well,
Yeah. Go ahead.
Now, what is the process then? Okay, let's say I'm a infantryman, and I get molested, I get assaulted by maybe a senior officer, a sergeant or a captain or something. What is the procedure? Who do I complain to? Where do I go?
Well, there's a sexual abuse coordinator, and you can file a report. But of course, you're filing a report. Like you said, it might be in effect your boss, your superior, and that you have to keep working with that person until everything's determined how it's going to go, and that when it's in a combat zone or in high-risk military settings, there's the risk of death. I worked with a guy who got sexually assaulted by these 5 sailors on board an aircraft carrier. And I don't know if you've ever seen an aircraft carrier, but the thing is like a city. It's massive. And basically after they got done raping him, they said, if you tell anybody, you will fall off of this ship. And you will not be found. And so he didn't report it. Okay? And so, and he had to stay in the unit where that happened. Imagine how weird that would be, to have to work with the coworkers that had raped you.
And I can only assume that would put you in a position where the rapes would continue.
Well, either that or you're actually, more likely to develop post-traumatic stress disorder as a result because you're constantly being reminded of it. Right. And I don't know how graphic I can get here, but this guy that I was just telling you about, when they got done raping him, they took a grease gun and filled his bowels with grease. And so for the next few days, every time he used the toilet, he had a reminder that they had done that to him.
That's just incredible. These aren't hardened criminals. These aren't sociopaths. These are just the kids we call heroes, and honor our vets, supposedly. Now, why is this? The 2 groups of people everyone says we care so much about, the veterans, right, and our children, right? We hold them. No, we want to protect our children, but yet we expose them over and over to these kind of attacks when we don't listen to them. They just changed the Title IX laws about reporting these kinds of incidents. And our veterans, we don't give them an outlet to protect them from this kind of stuff?
Well, it's, when people say, well, if only we'd get rid of women in the military, rape would stop. Well, rape of women would stop, yes. But the rape of male soldiers by male soldiers, there's documents in the Revolutionary War about that. So it's not the majority of the men perpetrating sexual assault against men identify as heterosexuals. they don't. It's not. Oh, it's these gay men who can't control themselves that are running around raping. It's heterosexual men doing it to have power over these other men that they want to punish or think are inferior. I'll give you an example of the whole thing about rape being more about power than about sex. Is this guy got gang raped, and the last guy that raped him said to him, "I have AIDS, and now you have AIDS." And this guy was just about to ship out, and in order to get AIDS tests, there's a period of time that has to pass, and you're supposed to get 2 of them. Well, he got home to his wife before that period of time had passed, and he wouldn't have sex with her because he was afraid that if he was infected, that he would pass it on to her. And she was like, why won't you have sex with me? And he'd say, well, and he never told her the reason that he wasn't having sex with her. And so she assumed that he'd been with prostitutes or having an affair or something. And so she divorced him. And I said, you could have prevented that by explaining it. And he goes, I would rather lose my wife and kids than tell them what happened to me, because they would lose all respect for me. I think they can forgive me for believing that I saw prostitutes or had an affair, but I don't think they could ever respect me if they found out that I was raped.
Because there's a certain type of man that, especially now with the volunteer army, there's a certain type of person that seeks out that kind of position in life. What is it about that culture that makes it more difficult for them to respond to this kind of attack?
Well, for one thing, men don't think that that's going to happen.
Right.
Like when I'll talk to an audience, I'll say, how many women here have had their mother had to talk with them on how to prevent getting raped? They all raise their hand. They go, how about you guys? How many of you guys did your dad sit down with you and say, here's how you don't get raped, son? Nobody. Okay. And so when it happens, they're stunned. Like, this isn't supposed to happen. And they're trained warriors. And so oftentimes what happens is there's fight, flight, or freeze when you get attacked. And they expect that they're going to fight. Well, oftentimes, they're outnumbered, or that the assailant has a weapon, or they have rank. And so what happens is that the person freezes and then punishes themselves for freezing instead of fighting back. And so they say, well, I should have been able to defend myself. In fact, I had one guy who said, there were these 5 guys and they all had weapons. I should have fought back. Well, you'd be dead. You don't get over getting dead. You can get over getting sexually assaulted.
And just to remind the audience, your background in this is you're a licensed psychologist, therapist. What is it? And I know you're a college professor.
Licensed as a psychologist and licensed as a marriage and family therapist.
And also, too, this is your specialty, that you evaluate people for PTSD and you testify in court over these kind of issues?
Yeah. I work with combat veterans, sexual assault survivors, incest survivors, basically people who have experienced traumatic events. And most people say, oh, my God, that sounds really depressing. And it's actually, very rewarding because there are, with treatment, people do get better.
So this is your wheelhouse. This is your specialty.
Yeah.
For how many years?
It's not like when I was a little kid. 30 years.
30 years, my God. You sound like a young man. Okay. You sound 30 years old. Okay. Now, one more question.
I'm 63.
Oh, get at it. God bless you, man. Okay, I'm 57. Okay. You sound great. Now, you mentioned before that many of the victims are homosexual. Now, when you have this culture or this policy, even a well-meaning policy, like don't ask, don't tell, right? Does that benefit or make things worse?
Well, the thing that don't ask, don't tell thing was because that if you identified as being gay, you could be discharged because of that. And the problem was that they found out, there's lots of gay people in the military, and they would be losing lots of valuable people. There's a great story that I have in the book where Eisenhower, at the end of World War II, calls in his secretary in the Women's Army Corps, and he says, well, looks like we won the war and everything, so now we got to clean up the military. We got to get rid of all these lesbians that I hear are in the military. And so you type up a list of suspected lesbians, and we'll get rid of them. And she says, yes, sir. Now, are you going to get rid of me after I write the list up or before? Because I'm a lesbian. And he's like, what? And then the next ranking person that was also in the meeting said, sir, I'm a lesbian too. And he says, all right, well, belay that order. And he never brought it up ever again.
But do you think if I'm in the military and I'm told, well, you're not allowed to talk about you being gay or not, does that create a culture where I'm more likely to be victimized?
Well, if it's a stigma, yeah. But it's actually getting to the point where there's a quiz I have in the back of the book, which is all about who is this dangerous group, and I have these quotes about that. If this happens, if we allow these kind of people into the military, it's going to be a disaster. And then I ask, is this African Americans, women, or gays? And I have never had anybody complete the quiz and get it right, because it's always the same arguments. So they say, well, we can't integrate the military with blacks and whites because it'll be chaos. We can't have women because it'll be chaos. We can't have gays because it'll be chaos. Well, now that people don't have to hide that they're gay, they're actually, the stigma is going way down. There's a story of a pilot that's in there, and it comes out that he's gay. And so his commanding officer gathers all the crews that fly with this man, and he said, well, I found out this guy's gay. That's not the word he used. And so what I'm telling you is you don't have to fly with him if you don't feel safe with him because he's gay. Now, I don't know what being gay has to do with your ability to fly a large aircraft or not, but, he says this, and to a person, all the crew said, yeah, we knew, and we don't care. He's the best pilot in the unit. Oh, okay then. He was afraid that their morale would go down. There was their morale is going to go down if you get rid of him. Now, and sometimes it's kind of anticlimactic. What happens is, one of the stories in the book, these bunch of guys are taking showers, and one of the members of the unit says, this is why you can't have gays in the military, because I wouldn't want to take a shower naked, with a gay guy. And one of the guys in the unit says, "Too late."
Yeah, right. Yeah, I'd say our culture is just so bizarre. It's just so concerned, worried about everything. Guys, different skin color than mine. Got to be worried. Got to be upset. But do you think that's by accident, or this is by conditioning? That we have these kind of separations and differences from other cultures and other beliefs and other orientations?
Well, I think that all those things are more taught than genetic. When I was a little kid, my father was in graduate school, and we lived in married student housing. And it was a university, and there were people from all over the world, all religions and colors and everything. And, I've looked at pictures of me in those days, and I'd be in this little wading pool full of, every color on the planet, And my parents would tell me this story about one day that I said to them, "How did you decide to have a white child?" And they were like, "What?" He goes, "Well, of all the color, you always buy blue Impalas. I know you like blue cars. How did you decide to have a white baby?" Well, we didn't have a choice. And so to me, it just was like a preference. Well, that's not racism, is it?
Right.
I just thought everybody was, he's a nice kid, period. If he's not a nice kid, it's not because of his skin color.
We're about to take a commercial break, but before we do, what do you say to the people who say, "Oh, Dr. Hunter, the military's changed now. They're addressing this issue"?
Well, yes, they are. which is, what I'd say is, well, it's about time. But the problem is that means there's, generations of people who were not only sexually abused by their comrades, but then were mistreated when they did report. We call that the second assault. Is that I have some people in the book that said, it was bad enough getting raped, but then when I reported it, I was treated so badly by the military as a result of that, I wish I hadn't reported it. Oftentimes what happens is if you report, you get transferred, not the person who's accused or persons who are accused of the assault.
Any penalties or repercussions? Or, is there a trial?
Yeah, when there is a trial, it's hard to convict because people will say, well, you were drunk or it was consensual or you asked that a condom be used and you say it's to protect you from sexually transmitted diseases. But it sounds to me like that basically what happened was you had sex and then you changed your mind or you want to punish this person or something. But that one of the most common crimes that military people are incarcerated for is sexual assault.
I didn't know that. Okay, now comparing arrests and convictions within the military to in the civilian life, and what's the rates in comparison there?
I don't remember the numbers. I just remember that on the break maybe I can look it up, but that if you take a civilian population of prison and say, well, how many people are in here for sex crimes, and you take a military prison and compare, is that there are going to be much higher percentage of inmates in the military prison that are there for sex crimes.
Okay, now that's interesting. Now, did you happen to look into, or maybe what the percentages of veterans then committing rapes and assault? Is that higher too as well?
I'd have to, I don't want to say something that that I can't back up here. So I can do some looking here while you're doing your commercial and see if I can give you some numbers.
Yeah, but I can tell you this: we just look at the trending of every question I've asked you so far. I think we can see where we're going with that. Now let's we'll take a commercial break. You know what I'm saying? This is just a horrific topic, and I'm just remembering right now how much I enjoy having a college professor on as a guest. It's just great to be able to sit back and really just absorb and learn. Dr. Hunter, you wanted to tell us about hazing.
Yeah, it's technically you're not supposed to do hazing, but it's understood that it happens all the time, and it's defended. Well, it's tradition; it's always been there, and it makes people tougher and all of that. I thought it was fascinating the list of things that people talk about that are supposed to make people tougher. Hazing many of those things were the things that were done to prisoners at Guantanamo Bay to break them down. If you do it to a comrade, it builds them up, but if you do it to the enemy, it breaks them down. And so people will talk about, they'll have symptoms that look like PTSD, and they'll say, well, I was never sexually assaulted. But then you ask them to describe some of these hazing experiences, and if those things had happened, outside the military, you'd say, wow, you got sexually assaulted.
And Doctor, we hear about the statistics for veterans: higher suicide rate, higher unemployment, higher incarceration, divorces higher, everything's rougher. There's 90 charities out there devoted to helping military vets, and still we have all these problems. Do you believe
how many of those?
Yeah, go ahead.
How many of those people are unidentified or untreated sexual assault survivors? And think about this: let's say two guys in a foxhole, they're getting shot at, and one of them develops post-traumatic stress disorder and the other one doesn't. What's the deal with that? Well, one reason is that trauma is cumulative. So that means that if a person already had a history of trauma, so another kind of trauma. So like female members of the armed forces tend to have higher rates of childhood sexual abuse than general public. 27% of the general public of females have childhood sexual abuse, but 49% of female members of the military have it. So you have somebody that's already maybe has child PTSD from child sexual abuse, and then you put them in a combat situation, and or then they get sexually assaulted, they're more likely to, have a worse case of PTSD.
Wait, let me clarify that. You're saying that when people, before they even enlist in the military, they're more likely to have been assaulted already?
Yeah.
Oh, fascinating.
Female combat veterans that have PTSD, 80% of them had been raped, 74% of them had been attacked with a weapon outside of the military. 67% reported that at least one of their loved ones had been murdered.
Fascinating. What can we do to prevent this, and then what can we do to treat this?
Well, how people who report how they are treated will determine whether other people report or not. Okay, that's true in incest situations. Working with, I have a female client who was sexually abused by her brother, and her sister was sexually abused. And the sister told the mother, and the mother said, "You're lying," and kicked her out of the house. Well, so the second daughter said, "Mom, I'm not going to report that. I'll just keep, just tolerate it until I get old enough I can leave on my own." And same thing happens in the military. If somebody reports being sexually abused and they get blackballed or sent off to a rotten position, their career stagnates and everything. Well, that's a clear message. Don't talk about it. Think about, you talked about a college professor. Like, let's say I'm in class, and somebody raises their hands and asks a question, and I say, "That's a stupid question." And I punch them in the face. And then I say, "Hey, are there any other questions?"
Right.
No one's going to say, "Oh, I got one." Okay.
Yeah.
And so that's one thing, is that how do we treat these people? And then, make it easier for them to get treatment. Part of the problem is if you get sexually assaulted in some obscure place, where are you going to get treatment? Well, it's helpful now. You can do some of it, by internet, they call it telehealth. But remember that if you're stationed deployed someplace, you're supposed to follow the chain of command, but what if somebody in the chain of command is the perpetrator? And that what we find is that the units where they have officers who accept sexual harassment, jokes and, grab ass and stuff like that, those units also have a higher incidence of actual sexual assault. So that the officer is saying, well, it's okay to do this on a certain level, and that it makes it more likely that the worst is going to happen.
All the things you're pointing out are just... Go ahead, please. But all the things you're pointing out are such common sense... you know what I mean? If it's not being done, it's not being done for a reason, because they don't care. Because this is all stuff that's easy.
Well, the other thing that happens frequently is that an officer will... either a clergy person or a counselor will use that power to sexually abuse one of the people coming to them for help.
Oh my God.
And if they get caught and it's taken seriously, they can offer to resign and say, "Just give me an honorable discharge. I'll resign. We don't have to go through this." And then they can go someplace else, and they're an untreated sex offender who also now has the status of being an honorably discharged veteran.
I had a case like that personally myself, where the guy was discharged from the Marines, possession of child pornography, and went honorable discharge, and went on later on to sexually abuse and molest little toddlers, and then again after that exchanging pornography afterwards, 20 years later, 30 years later.
Yep.
And he's in prison for that now, but could have got him 30 years ago, 25 years ago.
Well, and we've done that in the civilian world, too.
True.
It'd be like, oh, we find out this teacher sexually abuses kids. Oh, well, we'll move them to the high school then. That'll take care of it.
Let me ask you this real quick, because we see all these issues, okay? And then these veterans come out, higher suicide, higher unemployment, higher incarceration, less college education, less home ownership, and even with all the VA bill and all this stuff, 90 charities. And then 60% of our civilian police force is U.S. Army military veterans. And then you got police officers, higher percentage of all these things as well, domestic violence, sexual abuse of them. Do you think that's something that we should continue to encourage U.S. veterans entering into our civilian police force?
Well, certainly I've talked to lots of people who said, well, I went into the military to get the benefits and was military police with the plan of coming out and being law enforcement. But that if you get somebody who has PTSD from combat or sexual abuse or both, and you arm them and put them in stressful situations, that can lead to some dangerous outcomes. Like one of the things that most of the veterans that I work with that were deployed in the Middle East will say, I can't go to the mall, this particular mall, because there are a lot of people who are Muslim there, and have traditional dress on, and I freak out. I'm sure they're going to blow me up or something. Okay, well, you came upon that fear honestly because, when you were deployed, that did happen to you. But now, if that person's a police officer and put into that situation, and how are they going to respond? The choices are fight, flight, or freeze. And so, that once you learn how to be aggressive towards people, it's easier to continue to be aggressive towards people.
And once you've lived through that trauma, there's no amount of diversity training or watching videos or extra training that's going to heal you from that. And I expect the average person to rely on that as a solution to the problem. How do we help these victims?
Well, again, the treatment, that it's so pervasive that there are actually inpatient military sexual abuse treatment programs. The MST, there's actually initials for it because it's so common. One of the things you have to look out for is that I've had veterans particularly women, who have appealed their discharge because they behaved a certain way after the sexual assault, and they went to a military psychologist, and the military psychologist said, you have borderline personality disorder, which is a pre-enlistment condition, and therefore you're not entitled to any benefits because it's not as a result of your military service. And so then that's cheaper for the VA because now this person doesn't have to get any treatment.
There are conditions where a veteran will not get treated through the VA?
Well, yeah, if you get a dishonorable discharge,
okay, or
your diagnosis is not service connected.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
Yeah. So you say, and that's what these disability exams that I do. It'll say, does this veteran have a mental health diagnosis? Yes or no? And if they do, is it service connected, meaning that it happened as a result of their military service? And a borderline personality disorder is not something you develop as a result of experiences as an adult. It's things that happen to you as a child. And so that would be considered a pre-existing condition. And you could also say, well, did you check that you have any mental health problems on your enlistment forms and your pre-enlistment physical? And if you said no, then you enlisted under false pretenses.
So that's not much help right there.
No.
This is a sad show, What would you tell a kid who's young, or a parent whose kid wants to join the military? They're patriotic. He said, well, you get a free college education, you get a VA loans when you get out, and VA medical care when you get out.
Yeah.
Would you tell them yeah or no?
Well, there are certainly lots of people who have very good experiences in the military. A friend of mine who's a PhD level psychologist and regularly testifies as an expert and everything, he was told by his father that he was stupid, and he was told by his guidance counselor, hey, join the military because, you're too stupid, you won't be able to support yourself, 3 hots and a cot, that's all you can expect. And he joined the Army, and his sergeant said, you're going to go to officer training school. And he said, oh, no, I'm not, I'm stupid. He goes, no, you're not. I order you to stop telling yourself that you're stupid. And he went and got officer training, and they said, we want you to get a PhD, and they sent him to college, and they sent him, they paid for all of this, and it changed his life. The military can, and certainly the military has helped lots of minorities and women advance in ways that the civilian world hasn't. So a friend of mine's daughter was going to join the military, and I thought, I don't know what to do. And so I just said to her, here's a copy of my book, so you can make an informed decision about whether you want to join or not.
Thank you. That's what I'm going to do.
After reading it.
Yeah. Next time that question comes up, Honor and Betrayed. Yeah. Honor Betrayed. Sexual Abuse in America's Military by Dr. Mick Hunter. That's the next time that question comes up for me. That's what I'm going to send him to. Now, there were some topics you wanted to cover during the break. What else is on your heart that you want the audience to know? We have about 9 minutes.
Yeah, well, let's see. I guess one of the things is that people will assume that women are more likely to develop post-traumatic stress disorder as a result of a sexual assault than men, and it's actually men are more likely to, because men that are sexually assaulted in the military are more likely to be gang raped. So that means it's longer, for one thing, and that there's a competition between the various offenders to see how humiliating they can be towards the victim. And men are more likely to be sexually assaulted with weapons, and so there's more fear of death, and so more likely to develop post-traumatic stress disorder that way. Like I had one guy who came to me, and he had been gang raped, and everybody who had tried to treat him before kept focusing on this. Well, you probably worry that you're gay as a result of being gang raped. And he's like, no, I don't worry about that. And they just kept saying, well, you don't be ashamed of that, and finally I just asked him, what was the worst part of it? And he said, well, while they were gang raping me, they were holding my head underwater, and I thought I was going to die. That's the nightmares, not getting raped, drowning. I haven't taken a shower in 2 years. So, really listening to the person and saying, what happened to you and what meaning does it have for you, and what can we do to give you a corrective experience so that, being believed is very healing. I was on the video yesterday doing an assessment with this guy from 1969. He got sexually assaulted while he was in Vietnam, and he was out in the bush, and they basically said, if you tell anybody, you're going to get shot in the back. So he never told anybody, and he finally told a buddy of his, and the buddy said, you can get help for this, and so he put in for PTSD. And he told me I was only the second person in his life that he had ever told, and he said, do you believe me? And I said, yeah, I do. And he started sobbing because he said, I thought for sure you'd tell me that I was lying or that I should man up and, not have it affect me. And he said, I've tried to have it not affect me. And I said, well, I know. That's if you could just decide not to have it affect you, you would have by now.
Yeah, there's no doubt this is a difficult subject to talk about. It's uncomfortable, and then when you think about the consequences of what continues out, into the civilian police, or these suicides that we have every day, these mass suicides with these veterans. We are out of time, though. What do you want to leave us with in like 1 or 2 minutes? What do you want to leave us with to summarize all this?
Well, that oftentimes, like I said, people have not told anybody, and they might hint around that to see how you might react to some kind of a disclosure. I'd say, well, how come you never told anybody? Oh, I didn't want to be judged. I didn't want to be blamed. I was afraid they wouldn't believe me. So they might say something like, well, yeah, I heard of a guy who, claimed that he got sexually abused when he was in the military. And if you go, must be some kind of a faggot, then he's not going to tell you. And so to be sensitive that if somebody's kind of checking you out to see if maybe they could talk about it, and if they do talk about it, don't try to fix it. Just have like, oh wow, that sounds really hard, and I'm glad that you could tell me, and is there something that I can do? but don't try to fix it. Don't say, well, that was a long time ago, or let the person tell you at the rate they want to tell you.
How can people get a hold of you?
You can go to that website, and I got email. It's Mick, M-I-C, at drmichunter.com, or you can write me the old-fashioned way.
Dr. Hunter, I can't thank you enough. Like I said, it's a difficult topic. You're right there on the front lines. You're an expert on this. I can't thank you enough for coming on the show.
All right. Well, thanks for your taking it seriously and the good questions. I appreciate it.
Thank you, sir. Good night.